Hi everyone, I hope you had a great lunch, and we are back on track for the Privacy Engineer conference. We welcome Frederic Rivain, who is CTO of Dashlane, a password and data manager, and he is going to speak on that subject, how password managers are built for privacy and security, and what we could take from that architecture to implement it in every product. So hello, Frederic, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Jules. Thank you for welcoming me to talk about how we think about privacy and security, a very interesting topic. I know it's going to be a bit tough because it's right after lunch, so I hope not everybody will be sleeping and digesting and doing the siesta, but I'll try to make it lively and interesting for everybody, and feel free to ask questions.
Great, thank you.
Because of my setup, I won't see the chat as I speak. So Jules, if I can count on you to, if you want to interrupt in case there are like questions on the moment, feel free to do it. And otherwise, we have the Q&A at the end of the talk.
No problem.
Okay.
Have a great talk and see you. It's you for the Q&A.
Thank you. Let's do it. Give me 1 sec. Going back to my slides. All right. So welcome everyone. My name is Frederic Rivain. I'm the CTO of Dashlane. And kind of the first question I'm interested in is who knows about Dashlane? Are you using Password Manager yourself? Have you tested Dashlane yourself? We build a password manager, and the goal for us is to help you manage your digital identity in a safe and user-friendly way. And today, my goal is to talk to you about how we think about privacy and security at Dashlane. But let me give you first a bit of context. We were founded 12 years ago. Today, we have a team that is distributed between France, Portugal, and the US. And we have a product that serves both the consumers, the B2C, and the enterprise world with B2B. To give you a sense of scale, we have around 20 product engineering agile teams. When we think about privacy and security, it is really the two sides of the same coin for us. You can't have one without the other, really. And because we store very sensitive data for our customers, their logins, their passwords, their payment information, it is really mandatory for us to ensure that data is secure and private, only accessible by the users themselves. Our product and password managers in general must be built by design for privacy and security. It's kind of what we are. So let's take a look at the two sides, and let's start by the perspective of privacy. Firstly, well, you need to be clear about what data you have and how you classify. It seems to be obvious, but that's the starting point. For Dashlane, we have three main categories. The first one, the left column, the customer vault, that's the core of our product. That's everything that the user stores in there. Obviously, it's critically sensitive because that's the credentials, the payments, the IDs, and so on. The middle column, what we call the user data, we have two flavors of those. On the one hand, account data, things like the email that you use to create your account. And actually, we don't need that much on that front. And we try to proactively minimize what we have, especially around PII, in the sense of GDPR, like the personal identifiable information. And there's the second flavor of that user data, which is event data, the logs that we collect about the usage of the product. Yet again, we try to be frugal about it, but we do need some of it to operate and improve the product, to do marketing, and so on. And we have a third category on the right side, what we call the activity logs. They're also logs related but to how our users use Dashlane to interact with websites and online services. Whenever you're going to browse online, when you get on the website, we're going to autofill your credentials on that site. And that's the main usage of Dashlane. Of course, we don't want to know what a specific user is doing. And we consider those logs to be very sensitive data. So they are anonymized, they are aggregated on the client side. But let's do a bit of a deep dive in each type of data so that I explain the specifics of each. First, the way we manage a customer vault relies on the security concept that we call zero-knowledge architecture. It implies, zero-knowledge architecture implies that nobody can access the user data except the users themselves. And everything is built around that very simple notion, but in practice, it's very complex to put in the code. The short version, like I said, is that the vault is always encrypted locally on the user's device. We use a key derived from a secret that we call the master password, and only the user knows that key. That master password is never transmitted or stored by Dashlane. And by the way, that means that if you forget your master password, well, you can't do like a forgot password on a traditional website or service. We can't give you back your access. And in that case, you will have to start over your account. That's kind of proof that we don't have your data and it's really encrypted by a secret that only you know. The two other types of data are generated from the client apps, and they're stored in segregated databases. There's the user data directly tied to the user, while the activity logs, like I mentioned before, are anonymized locally in the client. And that's, by the way, that's done on the device side before being sent to the Dashlane server. And super important. And we are also dropping part of the timestamps to avoid the risk of correlation. And we're doing even more filtering on the server side just to ensure there is no issue. Because, for instance, you could have a client with a bug that sends unwanted details by mistake. So that's very important for us to sanitize the data. And because of the diversity of those logs and data that we have decided to set up at Dashlane what we call a data privacy committee. That's a group made of myself, our CISO, our general counsel, and members from the data and product team. And we have an ongoing review of our practices on that front. And in particular, we are going to evaluate regularly and improve the addition of new data points or logs. And that's a way for us to beforehand, before it gets to the code, make sure we agree on what we want to have in terms of data, and we feel it's private enough. One thing to keep in mind that we tend to forget about it is regarding the type of data and the explosion of the third-party SaaS tools that we use in all our companies. The more we use third-party tools, the more we have data that can be duplicated over there, and then you need to make sure that you are aware of the risk and the contamination risk with that data. And I'm thinking about platforms like Salesforce on the sales team, CRM platforms like Braze or SendGrid, Zendesk for customer support. All of those platforms, one way or another, they're going to get data from your customers, and you need to be aware of them and be careful about those. A word about the compliance side of privacy. Very important in today's world. Our world is becoming more and more regulated, and so this is not something you can really avoid. One, you should always try to minimize your compliance exposure. So the more you can limit the need for PII or for regulated data, well, the better you are. It's less complex and less a burden. Obviously, it's not always easy depending on your business, but that's what you should strive for from my perspective. And to facilitate compliance work and audits, ensure you have a strong segregation between your different categories of data, that you maintain up-to-date inventory of all data items, where they come from, what is their sensitivity, how are they used, where they could be forwarded, and so on. And of course, you need to define your retention policy per data type. How long should you keep each data type? When do you remove them, and so on? Well, you're very much aware of regulations like GDPR or CCPA, which is the Californian version of GDPR. And in those regulations, you have mandatory flows that are related to the data. So my advice to you is that you should automate all those flows to make sure that you respect the rules. That's not something you should do manually. For instance, deletion of account, which you need to provide as part of GDPR. That's something you should automate from the customer support or whatever system that you have across the board, meaning you need to include the deletion of data also in the third party. So if you have if you need to delete the account of a customer for you, you need to also delete it in your CRM, in your customer support platform, and so on. By the way, on the topic of deletion of account, you may have seen recently that Apple made it mandatory in iOS apps to offer in-app access to deletion of account. And all your practices should actually be compiled into your privacy policy. So I put a screenshot of the Dashlane privacy policy here. That needs to be on your website or in your applications visible to the customers. And one thing that I like about the way we built the Dashlane one is that there is a summary in plain English before each section and before we get into the legal jargon, because those documents, they can be very painful to read. So we've tried to do a mini summary in plain English for people to understand what they're reading. Feel free to take a look if you're interested. One last thought about privacy before we deep dive into security is that it must be an ongoing conversation inside your organization. We are not the static world, so it's important to always review our practices. How can we find the best solution for the business while ensuring the privacy of our users? At Dashlane, for that purpose, we have built what we call our privacy stance. I put a screenshot of the iRobot from Isaac Asimov, and we've done it a bit in the same way, like the 3 laws of robotics from Asimov. We have a set of principles from the highest order to the more specific, and principles must be considered in order, like principle 2 cannot go against principle 1. And so for us, for the Dashlane privacy stance, well, number 1, Dashlane as a company should never be able to access end user data. And here we are referring to the customer vault. Of course, if you store credentials, if you store payment information in your vault, well, Dashlane should never have access to it. And that's not only Dashlane, by the way, it's also hackers should never have access to it. Even regulated bodies or like enforcement shouldn't have access to it. Rule number 2, which is more related to the B2B context. As an employee, when you use Dashlane, you have the workspace and the personal space in your vault. The admin, the IT admin from your organization, they can know certain things about what's happening in your workspace because that belongs to the company, but never into your personal one. Rule number 3 refers to our logs and the way we manage account data that I mentioned previously. And finally, we have a specific principle around customization and personalization of user experience. Most of the time, we need it to happen on the client side to make sure we maintain privacy. So in our context, it makes our life a bit more complicated because there's a lot of the business logic that needs to happen on the client and that cannot run on the server side like for a traditional online service. By the way, you can find out more on the Dashlane blog. I've been giving more details about our Dashlane privacy stance if you're interested. And if you do not have a privacy stance yourself in your organization, I really encourage you to try and create one. It's an interesting exercise to do with the whole organization to make sure that there is alignment about how we think about privacy internally. Now let's look at the other side of the coin, which is the security side. And security is a bit of a different story. It's really about keeping all of us safe. And when I say all of us, it's really obviously our customers. This is one of the key purposes of our product for Dashlane, but it's also the employees and the company, that is to say our shareholders. And considering our business, it's obviously an essential point for us to exist. It involves building a secure product, but security is also a core feature that we can use as a marketing unique selling point. And we think about security also with two additional important considerations for Dashlane's mission. The first one is we consider that we have a role to play to educate our users. And let's be clear, most of them will start using Dashlane because of the pain point of managing the password, not because they really care so much about security. So it's really about the convenience of managing password. Yet, if we onboard and educate them the right way, if we do it in the best way, we will raise the awareness on security and we will improve their safety. So that's an important part of our mission. And last but not least, we hope that at our level, we can have some influence on the digital world. We can make sure that privacy and security become more and more foundational on the internet. An example of this is our participation to the FIDO Alliance, which is a consortium that tries to contribute to pushing for multi-factor authentication solutions. And the thing is with security is that it's kind of mission impossible. Dashlane, for instance, will be breached one day, and we will suffer a critical security incident. So we need to be pragmatic about it. The goal of our effort around security is not to guarantee that nothing bad will ever happen. The goal is one, to minimize the likelihood that it happens. Of course, it's a game of cat and mouse. We're trying to put protections and be smarter than the attackers. We aim at making it very complex and expensive for an attacker to target us. And that way, they will focus on the easier other targets. 2, we make sure that we are able to react to a security crisis as fast as we can. And that can make a huge difference depending on how prepared you are. Are you able to react fast? Do you have the right countermeasures in place? Do you have the right internal crisis organization? Have you built your investigation capabilities? The way we've done it at Dashlane is that we have our own code red plan, that's the way we call it, that formalizes everything that needs to happen in case of a security crisis. And we formalize it, but we also rehearse it on a regular basis. We practice it each time there is a kind of a potential issue. And we also rehearse it even when there is no reason to. And 3, finally, we strive to minimize the impact of a security breach. If something bad were to happen, how can we make sure we limit as much as possible the impact on our customers and for Dashlane? Cross fingers, all in all, so far so good. We never had a public security crisis or breach as far as we are aware, but that doesn't mean, again, that we should stop investing and they should consider it will never happen. It will happen one day, that's for sure. So if someone wanted to hack Dashlane, how would they do it? Let's try and identify together the attack vectors, like the main threat. What would be the attack vectors? What would be the exposure, the impact, and what could be the mitigation that we put in place to limit the risks? This is a kind of our threat model. If I take a look at the big picture, there are 5 main attack vectors against Dashlane, and we're going to deep dive a bit on each of one of them, but here's the high-level view. 1, compromising the Dashlane application. Here we're talking about mostly bugs and vulnerabilities in our software. 2, hacking the user device, planting a malware, a Trojan, a keylogger, for instance. 3, attacking the Dashlane servers. 4, breaching our internal IT organization, IT system. And 5, that's the human factor, exploiting the insider job, whether it is by bribing, threatening an employee, or because one of them would go rogue. So let's look into the details. Attack vector number one. So, well, no code is perfect. There are always bugs. There are always issues. So what if a malicious actor could exploit one of them to get access to the customer's data? It could be a bug in the client application. It could be a man-in-the-middle attack to intercept communication and capture data in transit. And here the impact is really about leaking some users' data. It depends, of course, of where the vulnerability would be, but that's the main risk. And by the way, a common theme for most attack vectors is the reputation risk. Even if the actual impact can be limited, there is a point about Dashlane reputation, and the communication in a security crisis is always very critical to us. There are many ways to mitigate that risk. Most of them actually relate to best practices of secure development software development, like code analysis, doing code review properly, multiple layers of security. Of course, you should remove all code continuously. I just want to highlight two of them. I mentioned already in the privacy side the zero knowledge architecture. It's super simple. It's a super simple principle, but it's very critical to doing things the right way. Our goal, yet again, is that the only user that can access the data is the user itself, nobody else, not Dashlane, not a hacker, not a governmental agency, and our whole product is built around that security concept. Of course, it makes developing Dashlane way more complicated because of all that security logic that needs to happen on the client side, and we have a complex cryptographic processes, but it is the heart of the security. And even for you, I don't know what's your business and your product, but even if you don't need to go as far as having a zero knowledge architecture, I encourage you to look at, okay, how can I make sure that I have that intention of a high level of security in my product. The second thing I want to highlight is bug bounty programs. It's impossible to have a security team that will be big enough. Even if we had a team of dozens of security engineers, it will not be enough. So the more eyeballs we can put on the code, the better, and the greater the chance we have that someone will find bugs. So use bug bounties. We use bug bounty programs like HackerOne, where we ask white hat hackers to investigate our code and try to find vulnerabilities. And that's very important to improve the security level. Our CISO, he likes to call those platforms like the Uber of security, and that's very much of the same analogy. So even if you're a small startup, I encourage you to start a bug bounty. You start small, and you will grow in time. The second attack vector is the compromission of the user's device. What if the user's laptop, the user's mobile phone is infected by a malware, a Trojan, a keylogger? Then the attacker could steal the user data directly from the device memory. For us, in a sense, once that happens, it's kind of game over. The device is compromised. The attacker is inside the house already. He has the keys of the house. Unfortunately, for Dashlane, there's not so much we can do to prevent this. This is really more of like an OS level challenge to mitigate against those malicious attacks. Still, we try to make the life of the attacker more complicated by using techniques like obfuscation in memory, hardware encryption, like using secure enclaves, advanced two-factor authentication, and so on. But it is more of an OS issue. Third issue, an attacker could try to penetrate our servers on AWS and steal the encrypted user data files from our servers. To be honest, in practice, I don't think that would be the most effective attack. The ROI on it wouldn't be great. Doing so, the attacker would get access to the millions of small encrypted files that we have on our servers, but they don't have the keys. We don't have the master password. We don't have the keys, thanks to our zero knowledge approach. So they could, of course, try to brute force each of those files, but that will require a massive amount of computing power and time. So I don't know that it's a very practical way. Also, server-side security hardening is a well-known activity, so there's no need to reinvent the wheel here. We leverage best practices from the industry, from some standards such as PCI DSS or SOC 2. Of course, we are on AWS, so we benefit from the built-in security of AWS, and we also benefit from all the years of the tech community to server security. So for Dashlane, it's really about trying to follow those best practices tightly and enforce our zero-knowledge concept. For compromising our internal IT infrastructure is more of a big deal for us, actually. The use case here is not so much about stealing company data or company confidential information like emails or accessing Slack or whatever. For us, the use case is more for the attacker to get access to our development environment so that they could plant like malicious code or backdoor directly inside the Dashlane product. And then, of course, that would lead to us shipping a compromised version of Dashlane to all our users. So the supply chain attack, you've seen what happened with SolarWinds, for instance, it was more of our concern. And as a startup, this one is really tricky. So you need to find the right balance between a strict IT like security and employee productivity. But still, we have to do what's right and find the right balance. We have 2FA everywhere. We have strong network security with bridge detection mechanism. We use tools called like Dartrace and so on. We have tight IT processes with least privilege access. You should have access to the minimum, only the systems that are required for you to do your job, and so on and so on. And by the way, I don't know if you had the same issue recently with COVID and everybody going even more to remote, but that thing is also evolving in time. Our on-premise is moving from like real core on-premise in our own data center to we host our solution, but we host them ourselves in the cloud. So that's a new challenges to solve for. And finally, the last attack vector has a similar impact in a sense as the IT breach. One comes from the outside, the other one comes from the inside, but the risk is similar. We trust our employees, but for their own safety, we also need to ensure that if one of our several employees were bribed with money, were threatened, or one of them would go rogue, they could not harm our customers and our company. And the sensitive system, yet again, is our software factory. We want to make sure that we have a very secure release pipeline with full traceability. You need approval from multiple engineers to be able to ship code. We sign the Dashlane Cloud application. And the goal here is to make sure that one employee alone could not ship a corrupted Dashlane build. So we make like those barriers more complicated. All right. I want to leave you with 3 key takeaways. The first one is that privacy and security, like I said, they're the two sides of the same coin, but it's not a topic just for the security and legal teams. It needs to be a company conversation. It needs to be something everybody is accountable for, from product to engineering, from sales to marketing, from finance. That's everybody's job. And yet again, it will not happen by magic. Oftentimes, the privacy and security is kind of that fifth wheel of the cart, but there needs to be real work and effort put into privacy and security. It should be a proactive effort from the company. And finally, most of the time, it is really about common sense. You don't really need to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot out there to learn from. Just do what seems to be the most obvious in your context. Keep it simple, but really integrate it from the start. Do it from the origin of the product and the business. It needs to be core to what you do. So if you don't use a password manager, well, you should use one. Here's an example with a privacy 2021 promo code to try Dashlane if you have never used a password manager. And I really want to leave you like with the importance of being safe in that COVID world of today, but being safe on the security and the privacy side as well. Be the ambassadors of privacy and security in your organization. And I'm happy now to take questions.
Thank you very much, Frederic. It was very, very interesting. So for the questions, did you choose the zero knowledge architecture from the beginning of the Dashlane project, or is it something that you decided to implement after? And the second part of the question is, what advices could you give to someone that today is not zero knowledge architecture and that want to go from non-zero to zero?
Yeah. In a sense, for us, it was easier because we started there. That was really the starting point. As a password manager, you need to be zero knowledge. But then, yet again, that's just a simple principle. You say, okay, I should never have access to the user data. The implication of how you implement it in your features, in your product, that's where the rubber hits the road, like you say. So there's a lot of gray zones about how you implement it. For a password manager, we need to be really more binary and as white as possible and not black. But that applies to any type of product. So, okay, for instance, how am I storing the password? So I'm a traditional online service. I manage my authentication mechanism. So I have the login of my customers and I have the password of my customer. How do I store that credential? Is it possible to steal that database and then get the password from all my customers? And then I don't know. I'm a note-taking application, so I will store the notes of my customers. Are they stored in plain text on my database or in file system, or are they encrypted? I am the one owning the keys for encryption, meaning if I get hacked and someone steals the keys, then they can steal the database and they can decrypt everything. Or am I actually giving the keys to the customer and I don't have the keys? For instance, if I think about solutions like the backup solutions like Backblaze or those type of solutions, or even Dropbox, like storage solutions. Those solutions, most of the time, they offer you to either do it for you because you think it's fine and you trust them, or they give you the ability to generate your own key and have your own key. That's a way for them to be kind of zero knowledge. And there's a lot of different flavors to do it, but I may give another example. For instance, forget password. I forgot my password. How do I build an account recovery mechanism in a zero knowledge way?
You don't know the password.
if I don't know the password, if I don't have access to the files, so that's pretty tricky, and it makes for a way more complex system. But it's possible. So you rely on a third party. For instance, if you're in a B2B context, the IT admin can be a trusted third party, so he will have part of the key. The customer will have a backup for the key on his device. So use the device from the customer. Use the IT admin. Use Dashlane as the postman, and then you find a way to recover the account that way. So it's really, you need to challenge yourself to go into that direction.
Okay, thank you very much, Frederic. So it was really, really cool. Yeah, we are at the end of the time. So I wish you a very pleasant day.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.